It began with a 911 call, a pastor's trembling voice on the line. "Please, my wife. She's not breathing." When police arrived at the Baker home in Hewitt, Texas, they found Kari Baker, a beloved mother, wife, and teacher, lying lifeless on the bed. Beside her, an empty bottle of sleeping pills, a half-finished wine cooler, and a typed suicide note. At first glance, it looked like a tragedy of despair. A wife overcome by grief, ending her pain in silence. But something about that scene didn't sit right. Her parents couldn't believe it. Her friends couldn't make sense of it. And soon, investigators would uncover that nothing, not the note, not the timing, not even the tears, was what it seemed. Because the man who called 911 wasn't the grieving husband he appeared to be. He was hiding something darker. And the story that followed would shatter a church, a community, and a family's faith in everything they thought they knew. This is the pastor's perfect life until he killed his wife. The story of Matt Baker, a Baptist minister from small-town Texas, whose image of devotion hid the face of deceit. Hewitt, Texas, just outside Waco, a quiet, close-knit town in the heart of Baptist country, where Sunday mornings mean packed pews and pastors are treated like family. Matt Baker wasn't just any pastor. He was charming, respected, and deeply involved in the lives of his congregation. To the outside world, his life looked perfect: a steady marriage, 2 beautiful daughters, a growing ministry, and a faith that seemed unshakable. His wife, Kari Baker, was everything a pastor's wife was expected to be: warm, devoted, kind. She was a school teacher, loved by her students, admired by neighbors, and committed to her husband's calling. Together, they were the picture of faith and family. Or so everyone thought. But beneath the surface of that perfect life were cracks no one dared to see. Moments of tension that never made it into the church bulletin. Rumors whispered behind closed doors. A husband obsessed with control, and a wife growing quietly afraid. And soon, tragedy would expose the truth. Was this the heartbreaking suicide of a woman overwhelmed by grief? Or the carefully crafted crime of a man desperate to protect his image? The answers lay buried beneath faith, betrayal, and a secret that would take years to uncover. This is the beginning of a story that asks one haunting question. How far will a man go to keep his perfect life from falling apart? Central Texas, a place where faith isn't just a belief, it's a way of life. Church steeples rise above the rooftops, Sunday gatherings fill the streets, and the pastor's word is often taken as truth. In towns like Hewitt and nearby Waco, reputation means everything. The church isn't just a place of worship, it's the heartbeat of the community. Families gather there, children grow up there, and trust is given freely to those who lead the flock. And among those leaders was Pastor Matt Baker. Crossroads Baptist Church wasn't large or grand, but it was alive, with laughter, prayers, and the steady voice of a young preacher who seemed to have all the answers. Matt was known for his charm, his smile, his words that could stir emotion in a crowd and make pain sound temporary. To his congregation, he was a man chosen by God. To his wife, Kari, he was something else entirely, a man she loved deeply, but one whose warmth had begun to fade. Before the tragedy, the Bakers were seen as the ideal couple. Matt and Kari met in the late 1990s, both students at Baylor University. She was drawn to his charisma, his confidence, his calling to ministry. They married quickly, a young couple ready to serve, to build, to spread faith together. Soon after, Matt began working in ministry. He preached about hope, about marriage, about trust in God's plan. Kari stood by his side, leading Bible studies, organizing events, raising their 2 little girls, Kenzie and Grace. To the community, they were the perfect family, a portrait framed by faith and purpose. But behind closed doors, there were struggles no sermon could fix. Years earlier, the Bakers had faced an unbearable tragedy. Their first daughter, Cassidy, had died at just 16 months old, a rare brain tumor taking her before she could even walk. The pain of that loss rippled through their marriage. Matt spoke of faith conquering grief. But inside, Kari was drowning. Friends later said that Kari's eyes changed after Cassidy's death, softer, sadder, as if she carried her daughter's memory everywhere she went. Matt, on the other hand, turned his grief into image. He became the preacher who had suffered and overcome, the man who told his congregation that God gives and takes away for a reason. But not all wounds heal through faith alone, and for Kari, the cracks in their marriage began to widen. Those close to her saw moments of exhaustion, a woman trying to hold a family together while her husband seemed more focused on the church than on her. Still, she smiled. She showed up. She believed in the image of their perfect life because in their world appearances mattered. In that Texas Baptist culture, you didn't air your pain, you prayed it away. As the years passed, Matt's role in the church grew, and so did his confidence. But Kari's quiet fears grew too, fears she confided to friends and in her private journal. She loved her husband, but something about him was changing. The town saw the Bakers as a symbol of faith. The truth was their faith was holding by a thread, and soon that thread would snap, setting off a chain of events that would expose not only a marriage's collapse, but the darkness that can hide even in the house of God. Before he became Pastor Matt Baker, before the tragedy, the headlines, the trial, there was a young man who wanted to save souls. Born and raised in a conservative Texas family, Matt grew up surrounded by faith. Church wasn't just a Sunday ritual, it was his identity. He sang in youth choirs, led prayer circles, and dreamed of one day standing behind a pulpit of his own. At Baylor University, Matt found his stage. He studied religion and found purpose in theology, but what truly captivated him was the attention, the applause after a sermon, the admiration when he spoke with conviction. Even as a student, he was charming, confident, magnetic, the kind of man who could make a crowd believe anything he said. It was at Baylor that he met Kari Baker. She was kind, thoughtful, and grounded, a devoted Christian studying education. Where Matt sought attention, Kari sought meaning. Where he preached, she listened. And in that quiet balance, they fell in love. Their romance was quick, passionate, full of promise. They married not long after meeting, convinced that God had called them to serve together. They dreamed of raising a family built on faith, of planting churches, of leading others toward the light. Matt went on to attend Truett Theological Seminary, the same school where many future pastors trained for ministry. He was ambitious, eager to prove himself, determined to rise quickly through the ranks of the Baptist network. And he did. From youth ministry to associate pastor roles, Matt built a reputation as a gifted speaker and counselor. He was the pastor who made teenagers laugh, who knew every congregant's name, who could lead a sermon with confidence and ease. But behind that charisma was something else, a man who loved control. He needed to be admired, needed to be seen as flawless, and that hunger for perfection began to bleed into every part of his life. When he and Kari lost their first daughter, Cassidy, to a brain tumor, the tragedy should have brought them closer. Instead, it fractured something between them. Kari turned inward, holding on to faith through pain. Matt turned outward, using the loss as part of his public identity. He spoke about it in sermons, turned it into testimony, a story of a man who had endured heartbreak and still believed. To the church, it was inspiring. To Kari, it was painful. Her private grief had become his performance. Over time, the gap between their public image and private life grew wider. Matt's ambition consumed him. the hours at church, the meetings, the counseling sessions that went late into the night. And in that growing distance, Kari began to feel invisible. People who knew them back then described Kari as the steady one, calm, gentle, deeply compassionate. Matt was energetic, driven, and at times dismissive. If he felt he was losing control, he'd tighten his grip on his home, his wife, and his reputation. But even as cracks formed, they stayed the perfect couple on the outside. The pastor and his wife, the picture of Christian devotion, the family that smiled in every church bulletin. No one could have imagined that beneath that smile a storm was building, a storm that would one day destroy everything they had built together. From the outside, the Bakers seemed blessed beyond measure. A beautiful home in Central Texas, 2 bright daughters, Kenzie and Grace, and at the center of it all, Pastor Matt Baker, the man everyone in Crossroads Baptist Church admired. He was more than a pastor. He was the heartbeat of the congregation. Sundays began and ended with his voice, powerful, persuasive, commanding. He baptized the young, counseled the broken, and stood by grieving families. To his community, Matt was the model of moral strength. To his followers, he was a man who lived exactly what he preached. Crossroads Baptist wasn't just a church, it was a family, built on faith and fellowship. They hosted potlucks, charity drives, mission trips. The Bakers were always there, smiling in every photo, holding hands at every event. Matt led prayer nights while Kari volunteered with children's ministries, teaching lessons of kindness and forgiveness. To the outside world, it looked perfect. A Christian marriage built on purpose, devotion, and love. But behind closed doors, something darker was quietly unfolding. Kari was struggling. The loss of baby Cassidy years earlier had left an ache that never truly healed. She tried to be strong for her daughters, for Matt, for the church that watched their every move. But there were moments when the grief would return, uninvited and unbearable. Moments when she'd cry alone, her faith the only thing keeping her standing. And Matt, he had changed. What once looked like leadership had become control. He expected perfection, not just from his congregation, but from his family. He managed how they dressed, how they spoke, even how Kari behaved in public. To him, image wasn't just important, it was everything. There were whispers in the congregation, soft at first. A woman said she saw Matt getting too close to another church member. Another claimed he spent long nights counseling young women behind closed doors. Kari's parents began to worry, noticing how distant she seemed, how often she forced a smile. And then there was the discovery that shook her, the moment that turned quiet suspicion into real fear. While cleaning one afternoon, Kari found crushed pills hidden inside Matt's briefcase. He brushed it off when she confronted him, said they were leftover medication, nothing serious. But the unease in her heart grew louder. Something wasn't right. Around this time, Kari began keeping small notes. Things she saw, things she felt, things she feared. Her counselor would later recall her saying, "I don't know what's happening to me, but I feel like Matt wants me gone." Still, in public, the facade continued. Family photos, Sunday smiles, the perfect pastor's wife routine. They sang hymns together while their marriage quietly fractured beneath the surface. The illusion was powerful, even to those who thought they knew them best. And that illusion would soon become the greatest disguise of all, masking the final days before everything came crashing down. By early 2006, the cracks in the Baker marriage were no longer invisible. To outsiders, it still looked picture perfect, a pastor and his wife leading by example. But behind the closed doors of their Hewitt, Texas home, their faith was losing its footing. Matt had grown distant, distracted, and Kari could feel it in the silence between them, in the way he avoided her eyes at dinner, in the way he always seemed to be somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Then, one day, something shifted. Her husband, the preacher who had once quoted scripture about fidelity and purity, was now spending more and more time with a younger woman from church. Her name was Vanessa Bulls. She was the daughter of a music minister, young, impressionable, and deeply involved in church life. Matt began counseling her, guiding her, mentoring her. But that mentorship quickly became something more. By March 2006, Matt Baker, the Baptist pastor, was having an affair, a secret relationship that would change everything. He told Vanessa that his marriage was over, that Kari was depressed, unstable, even suicidal. He painted himself as the victim, the misunderstood husband trapped in a loveless home, and Vanessa believed him. While his sermons on Sundays spoke of faithfulness and truth, his weeknights were spent whispering lies in the dark. At home, Kari sensed something was wrong. She told friends she couldn't trust him anymore. She told her counselor she was scared. And she told her family that she felt something evil was creeping into her life. But there was more, something much darker than just infidelity. Around this same time, Matt began using his computer for searches that would later shock investigators. Overdose by sleeping pills. How many Ambien does it take to die? And even buy sleeping pills online. He ordered bottles of Ambien from offshore pharmacies, hidden under his name. A pastor, buying pills to end a life. Then came the first chilling sign. Kari discovered crushed tablets in Matt's briefcase, pale powder wrapped in tissues. When she confronted him, he smiled, said they were old, said he didn't even remember putting them there. But deep down, she knew. Something was coming. In the weeks that followed, Kari grew more anxious. She reached out to her counselor again, describing how unsafe she felt. She began looking for teaching jobs outside Hewitt, a new start, maybe even an escape. But every time she tried to pull away, Matt tightened his grip. He played the part of the loving husband in public, but in private, he criticized her faith, her parenting, even her sanity. To everyone else, he was a man under pressure. But to Kari, he was a man she no longer recognized. The affair deepened. Vanessa, now emotionally bound to Matt, said later that he told her he had a plan, that his wife's death would be an accident, that soon they could be together, free from judgment, free from sin. And Kari began writing goodbye letters to friends, not because she planned to die, but because she feared she might. Every small argument, every night she lay awake listening for his footsteps, felt like another warning. The signals were there, the secrets, the searches, the sleeping pills, the mistress, the quiet storm forming behind that perfect Sunday smile. She didn't know it yet, but Kari Baker was only weeks away from her final night. It was a quiet Friday night in Hewitt, Texas, April 7th, 2006. To the neighbors, nothing seemed out of place at the Baker home. A modest brick house, a pastor, his wife, and their 2 daughters asleep inside. But inside those walls, the calm was an illusion. And before the night was over, everything would change. That evening, Matt and Kari seemed distant again. He claimed he wanted to relax, maybe rent a movie. She seemed withdrawn, heavy with thought. It wasn't the first tense evening between them, but something about this one felt final. Sometime around 11 p.m., Matt says he left the house. He told police later he drove to a nearby gas station, filled up his car, and rented a movie. But the records didn't quite match. The video rental receipt showed he checked out the movie closer to 11:50 p.m., nearly 40 minutes after he said he left home. And that missing half hour would later become one of the biggest mysteries of the case. At 12:01 a.m., a 911 call came through. Matt Baker's voice was frantic. He told dispatchers he'd come home and found his wife, Kari, dead, an apparent suicide. His words were fast, emotional, almost rehearsed. He said she'd taken sleeping pills, drank wine, and left a note. He begged them to come quickly. When police arrived, the scene was unsettling. The bedroom door was locked from the inside. Matt said he had to use a screwdriver to break it open. Inside, they found Kari lying on the bed, naked, motionless, pale. A bottle of Unisum sleeping pills lay nearby, along with 2 empty wine cooler bottles. Beside her, a neatly typed suicide note sat on the nightstand. But something about it felt off. The font, the spacing, the tone. It didn't sound like Kari. It didn't even sound like a suicide note. Matt told the officers he'd tried to revive her, that he had even dressed her body while on the phone with 911. He said she'd been depressed for months, mourning their lost child. At the time, the police didn't see a reason to doubt him. After all, this was Pastor Matt Baker, a man of God, a pillar in the community. Why would he lie? So the justice of the peace ruled it a suicide over the phone, without an autopsy. The death certificate was signed, and the case was closed. But Kari's family, the Doolins, couldn't accept it. Something deep in their hearts screamed that this wasn't right. They said Kari would never have taken her own life. She was planning her future. She was making changes. She was trying to live, not die. The house was cleaned quickly. The evidence was boxed up. The pastor preached at his wife's funeral, speaking about God's plan and sorrow and peace. He wept in front of the congregation, and for many that was enough. But beneath that polished grief, something sinister was already beginning to unravel. Kari Baker's death was officially ruled a suicide that night. But what no one knew yet, not the police, not the church, not even Vanessa Bulls, was that this so-called tragedy was about to become one of Texas's most haunting betrayals of faith. For months after Kari Baker's death, the small town of Hewitt, Texas, moved on. The church mourned. The pastor returned to the pulpit, and the case file, thin and unfinished, sat in storage. To most it was over, but not for Kari's parents, Jim and Linda Doolin. They refused to believe their daughter had taken her own life. They knew her faith. They knew her love for her daughters. And they knew something about that night didn't add up. So they began their own investigation. They hired Bill Johnston, a respected former U.S. attorney, and 2 private investigators, Mike McNamara and John Bennett. Together, they started re-examining every detail of Kari's so-called suicide. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. Matt Baker's story didn't fit the evidence. The timeline was off. The movie rental record didn't match his account. And the typed suicide note, it had no fingerprints, no signature, no emotion. It read like a draft, not a cry for help. Then came a discovery that made investigators stop cold. Phone records showed nearly 180 calls made from Kari's cell phone after her death. Most of them weren't from Kari's contacts. They were from Matt. And when police later traced the phone, they found it had been given to Vanessa Bulls, the young woman Matt had been secretly seeing. Now the facade of the grieving pastor began to crumble. As forensic analysts dug into Matt's computer, a darker side emerged. Search histories revealed entries like Ambien overdose, sleeping pills and alcohol, and how long to die after taking Unisum. He wasn't searching for comfort. He was searching for method. Investigators also discovered he had ordered pills online just weeks before Kari's death. And those pills matched the same kind found near her body. Then a breakthrough. The justice of the peace who originally ruled Kari's death, a suicide, reversed the ruling after reviewing new evidence. The case was reopened. Kari's body was exhumed for a full autopsy, 3 years after she was buried. The results were chilling. Toxicology found traces of Ambien and Unisom in her muscle tissue, but not enough to prove an overdose alone. Still, it told a story. Those drugs had been in her system, likely used to incapacitate her. The official cause of death remained undetermined, but the context, the pills, the note, the affair, the inconsistencies, painted a much clearer picture. Then came the most damning testimony of all. Investigators finally turned their attention to Vanessa Bulls. Under pressure, she admitted to the affair, and then she said something that changed the entire investigation. Matt had confessed to her. He told her how he had drugged Kari, waited until she was unconscious, and smothered her with a pillow. He said Kari wouldn't wake up, and that's when he staged the suicide scene, typed the note himself, and called 911 to play the grieving husband. Vanessa's statement broke the case open. Investigators built a timeline, minute by minute. The missing 40 minutes between Matt's movie run and his 911 call now fit the theory of murder. By August 2007, a public inquest was held in Waco. After hearing the evidence, the jury voted unanimously to change Kari's manner of death from suicide to undetermined. It wasn't yet labeled murder, but everyone in that room knew what it meant. The preacher's story was falling apart, and soon the law would come knocking. In October 2007, Matt Baker was indicted for murder, but what no one expected was how long he would fight to keep his halo from shattering. 2 years after Kari Baker's death, the man who had preached from the pulpit every Sunday was now standing before a jury, accused of murdering his own wife. Matt Baker, the Baptist pastor, charged with first-degree murder. A trial that would divide a community and expose a chilling double life hidden beneath a cross and a collar. It was January 2010 in Waco, Texas. After years of questions, grief, and tireless pursuit by Kari's parents, the case had finally made it to court. The prosecution came prepared, armed with phone records, computer data, and a confession from the one person who knew the truth. Vanessa Bulls. Matt's defense team argued the same story he'd been telling for years, that Kari had taken her own life, overcome by grief for their lost child. But the jury was about to hear a very different version of that night. Vanessa took the stand. The courtroom fell silent. She confessed to her affair with the pastor, but what she revealed next was darker than anyone imagined. Vanessa testified that Matt had told her exactly how he killed Kari. He said he crushed sleeping pills into Kari's drink that evening, just enough to make her drift off. He waited until she was unconscious. Then he took a pillow and smothered her until she stopped breathing. Afterward, she said, he typed the suicide note himself, cleaned the scene, and staged the body to make it look like a tragic overdose. She told the jury that Matt later boasted, "Everyone thinks it was suicide. They'll never know." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but the impact was explosive. The defense tried to tear her apart. They called her a liar, a woman scorned. They said she was seeking revenge, that her story changed too many times to be trusted. But prosecutors had more. They brought in the computer forensics, the search history of Ambien and alcohol, the online pill orders, the deleted browser entries. They showed the jury photos of the crime scene, Kari's lifeless body, the note, the bottles, the bed. And then they pointed to Matt's behavior afterward, flirting with Vanessa at the funeral, returning to the pulpit weeks later, preaching about God's mysterious ways. The jury saw through the holy image. The halo was gone. In its place stood a man who had weaponized faith to hide his own sin. As the trial stretched on, Kari's parents sat quietly in the front row, their faces marked with pain and determination. They had waited 4 long years for this moment, to see truth finally confront deception. The defense argued there was no physical proof, no cause of death that could be medically confirmed, but prosecutors didn't need a body that shouted. They had a story that whispered, and every whisper led back to Matt Baker. After 10 days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. It didn't take long. On January 20th, 2010, the verdict was read. Guilty of murder. Matt Baker stood motionless, his face pale, his jaw tight. He showed no tears, no prayer, just a quiet resignation, as though his faith had finally stopped working. The judge sentenced him to 65 years in prison. For Kari's parents, it wasn't victory. It was survival. As reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, Linda Doolin's voice broke through the noise. She said, "Justice doesn't bring her back, but it keeps him from hurting anyone else." Matt Baker was led away in handcuffs, a pastor stripped of pulpit and pride. The man who once preached salvation was now the sinner, judged not by God but by 12 ordinary people who saw the truth beneath the sermon. When the courtroom doors finally closed on Matt Baker's trial, the world moved on. But for those left behind, the story didn't end. It just changed shape. For Jim and Linda Doolin, Kari's parents, justice had come. But peace never truly followed. They had spent nearly 4 years fighting to prove their daughter hadn't taken her own life. Now the man they once called son was behind bars. In interviews, Linda said she still wakes up some mornings expecting to hear Kari's voice, but instead she hears silence, the kind only a mother who's buried her child can understand. The Doolins turned their pain into purpose. They began speaking publicly about domestic abuse, about manipulation cloaked in religion, and about the danger of trusting appearance over truth. Their message was simple. Evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears a cross. Meanwhile, behind the walls of a Texas prison, Matt Baker continued to claim his innocence. He wrote letters to reporters, maintained that Kari was suicidal, and said the system had been influenced by emotion and vengeance. But even his fellow inmates, even the people who'd once defended him, saw through the mask. The congregation at Crossroads Baptist Church fractured. Some refused to believe the verdict, saying, "Our pastor couldn't do that." Others quietly left, disillusioned, betrayed, haunted by the realization that the man who had baptized their children was capable of murder. Faith itself became a question mark in Hewitt. How could a man who preached love commit something so cruel? How could the community have missed the signs? Books, documentaries, and talk shows soon followed. Journalist Catherine Casey published Deadly Little Secrets, a chilling deep dive into Matt's double life and the investigation that exposed him. The story reached national attention, a pastor's mask ripped away in front of the entire country. But in the middle of all that noise, 2 young girls, Kenzie and Grace, were growing up without their mother, and without the father they once prayed beside every night. Their lives became the quiet aftermath of this tragedy, protected from media attention, their privacy fiercely guarded by Kari's family. What is known is that they were raised by the Doolins, surrounded by the love their mother would have wanted for them. Over the years, Kari's story has become more than just another crime. It's a cautionary tale about trust, about the hidden side of faith, and about the danger of image over truth. Matt Baker's 65-year sentence may have closed a legal chapter, but the emotional one continues. In every Sunday service where someone wonders who they can really trust. In every church pew where appearances still matter more than truth. And in every small town where people whisper, "Did you hear about the pastor who killed his wife?" Because in the end, the story of Matt and Kari Baker isn't just about a murder. It's about the cost of deception, the power of faith twisted into control, and the family who refused to stop fighting until the truth was finally heard. Every true crime story leaves behind more than a verdict. It leaves a question, one that lingers long after the headlines fade. Why? Why does someone who seems righteous, trusted, even holy, choose to destroy everything they built? The case of Matt Baker is not just a crime story, it's a mirror reflecting the darker corners of human nature and the quiet power of image. To the world, Matt was a shepherd, a pastor, a man of faith, guiding others toward God. But behind closed doors, he was a man consumed by ego, control, and fear of exposure. He lived for his reputation, and when that perfect image began to crack, he did what narcissists often do. He tried to erase the evidence of imperfection. That evidence was his wife. Psychologists often describe this kind of dual life as image management disorder, the obsession with being seen as good, even when your actions contradict everything you preach. Matt Baker's world revolved around appearances, the church, the sermons, the praise, the power. He knew how to play the part. He knew how to smile, how to weep on cue, how to hide sin behind scripture. And in that performance, he lost his humanity. But maybe, beneath all the lies, there was something broken long before Kari's death. Some point after the loss of their infant daughter Cassidy, something inside Matt shifted. Grief can change people. It can either humble the heart or harden it. For Matt, it hardened. The mask of faith became armor against guilt, until deceit became his new devotion. And Kari, she represents the light that so many victims of manipulation carry. She trusted, she prayed, she believed love and faith could fix what was falling apart. But sometimes faith can be a double-edged sword. It teaches forgiveness, but it can also silence intuition. It tells us to see the best in people, even when danger is standing right in front of us. This case forces us to ask, what happens when religion becomes a stage and morality becomes a mask? What happens when churches, families, entire communities choose comfort over truth and image over integrity? It's easy to label Matt Baker as a monster, but maybe he's something far more dangerous. A warning, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles from the pulpit. Sometimes it wears a wedding ring. Sometimes it prays before it kills. The lesson of Kari Baker's story isn't just about murder. It's about awareness, about seeing beyond charm, beyond charisma, and questioning what's real. Because faith should bring light, but in the wrong hands, even light can be used to blind. In the end, the story of Matt and Kari Baker isn't just about death. It's about deception, about how the image of holiness can hide the darkest truth. Kari's life was full of light. Her students loved her, her daughters adored her, and her faith guided everything she did. Yet her trust was betrayed by the man who vowed before God to protect her. Matt Baker once preached about forgiveness, love, and redemption, but behind that pulpit, behind every polished sermon, was a man terrified of losing control. He could quote scripture, but not live by it. And when that fragile illusion of the perfect pastor began to crack, he chose to destroy the one person who saw the truth. Tonight, her story stands as a warning that sometimes the pulpit hides the worst sins, and sometimes faith can be used as a weapon when placed in the wrong hands. If you've stayed with us through this journey, you know this case is about more than one crime. It's about the danger of appearances and the courage of those who refuse to accept the easy answer. Kari's parents, Jim and Linda Doolin, fought for years to reveal the truth. They turned grief into purpose and silence into justice. Because love doesn't stop at loss. It fights until the truth is known. And maybe that's the message we're left with tonight. Evil can hide anywhere, even in a smile, even in a sermon. But truth always finds its way to the surface. This has been the pastor's perfect life until he killed his wife. If this story struck you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe justice was truly served? Was it guilt or a deeper darkness no one saw coming? Subscribe for more true stories like this. Real crimes, real people, and the truths that hide in plain sight. Because sometimes, the most faithful face is the one wearing the mask.